Good. I am Mollie Morton, and my great-grandfather, John Morton, opened the Morton Brothers store in Smithville, Missouri in 1893. In order to discuss the history of the Morton store, it is important to know the ancestors from the Rollins and the Morton families that came to Missouri and a general knowledge of their past. Both families mainly came to Virginia when they left England, and from there began their lives in America, moving to Kentucky and eventually Smithville, Missouri. Surnames that have led to the present through these families include Duncan, Breckenridge, Farmer, Kennedy, Strode, Ellison, Herndon, Dew, Penn, Riggs, Stubblefield, and Swope, many familiar to Smithville residents. My grandfather, Leon Mapes Morton, was the second child of John Morton and Martha, who was called Mattie Rollins. The story will begin with the Rollins family because they came to the Smithville area first. This is a genealogy chart that was written by my grandfather, John Morton. The Rollins family, written by Josephine Rollins, Todd Hutter, Barnard, and Lee and Susan Penn Rollins, and their descendants by Lucille Brown Reynolds, are the foundation for my genealogy research on my Rollins side. I attribute this book and the Morton book to my grandfather, Leon Morton Sr., who diligently worked on both books beginning in the 1930s. It is thought that our Rollins family descended from Henry Rollins, who, with his wife, 2 sons, and 2 servants, sailed from the port of London in 1635 and originally landed in Virginia. Soon he went to Maryland and eventually owned land in both Maryland and Virginia. We are descendants of his son Joshua, who married Mary Sophia Kennedy and died around 1801. Sophia's father, John Kennedy, who married Esther Stilley from the Swedish colonies in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania-Delaware area, was captured at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse during the Revolutionary War, and as a POW was starved to death on the prison ship Jersey. Joshua and Sophia's son, Lee, was born in 1801, a little before his father's death, in Bourbon County, Kentucky, and married Susan Penn, daughter of Joseph and Charlotte Aker Penn. They came to Clay County and settled near what is now Paradise in 1830 with Lee's widowed mother, Sophia, and their first 5 children. Lee accumulated 1,400 acres of land, which he paid for in gold. The family survived the bushwhackers who looted their home. Lee died in 1854 and Susan died in 1869, and they are buried on the homestead in the Rollins Cemetery. The land is now owned by the Neff family. On February 15, 1837, the Indian Treaty, which allowed access to Minnesota and Wisconsin lumber for houses in Missouri and Ohio, was ratified and more people moved west. By 1860, it was estimated that 500 people lived in Smithville. Lee and Susan had 14 children, and the history of each up until the 1970s is available in the Rollins books. My Morton family is from the 11th child, William Penn Rollins, born October 22nd, 1841, and he died May 10th, 1921. William Penn Rollins was a veteran of the Civil War, having enlisted in Springfield, Missouri, in Company G, 2nd Regiment, 5th Brigade, Missouri State Guards, on the Confederate side, and was engaged in the Battle of Pea Ridge. He did some other stuff too, we're not going to talk about. He later entered taught school at Turn. One winter, he worked in the silver mines of Nevada, and in the 1890s, he was employed in the Cripple Creek, Colorado mines for several years. He married Rosella Aker in August of 1867. They were the parents of my great-grandmother, Mattie Rollins, who was married in this house that we see. And here's their family. And here's Mattie. Moving to the Morton side of the family, I'm very lucky to have a book that my grandfather spent much time working on, as he did the Rollins side. Genealogy of John Morton, Henrico County, Virginia, and his descendants, compiled by Beulah Jeanette Johnson, 1939. Columbus Harris Morton, my great-great-grandfather, was born in 1838 in Covington, Kentucky. He went to medical school in Cincinnati and then served as an officer physician in the Civil War for the Union side. Although Kentucky was considered a southern state, Louisville residents were sympathetic to the North. This proved very important to President Lincoln, who needed the waterways available to bring supplies to his troops in battle. After the war ended, Columbus Morton followed his uncle, Judge Benjamin H. Morton, to Platte County, Missouri, soon relocating to Smithville. He married a local girl, Sarah Braskill, in September of 1866. C.H., as he was known, practiced medicine and knew the James brothers before they became outlaws. He used his efforts and influence, which resulted in the erection of the first school building in Smithville, which stood on the site of the downtown school building. C.H. and Sarah had a son, John Stroud, born September 22nd, 1867. John attended state normal schools at Kirksville in Warrensburg, Missouri, and he taught school for a time. He was a clerk for Braskill and Thatcher Mercantile Store in Smithville for 4 years for his uncle, Jack Thatcher. John S. Morton married Martha Stewart Rollins, we've talked about her, Maddie, on February 10, 1892. This is his brother Crawford at a desk in the store. Notice the Maytag Ringer washing machine. And they sold Maytags up to when the store closed. In 1893, at the age of 26, he and his 19-year-old brother, Alex Crawford Morton, formed a mercantile business in partnership named Morton Brothers in the Odd Fellows building. This is the beginning of the Morton department store. 1893 was a notable year, with the zipper being introduced at the Chicago World's Fair and the Gibson Girls being created by illustrator Charles Dana Gibson. John and AC, as Crawford was called, opened the store with a boxcar of merchandise shipped from Chicago to Edgerton, the nearest rail point, and operated on a cash basis. In May of 1893, their first carload of merchandise arrived in Smithville. John and Crawford quickly began to unload the merchandise that they had made a trip to Chicago to order and started stocking the shelves of their newly founded general store. While they were still putting stock on their shelves, Mrs. Will Thatcher happened by and noticed some garden seed. She asked if it was for sale. The men said that it was, and their first sale was a 5-cent package of garden seeds. Business had its ups and downs. This is the picture of the John Morton family in front of their house. In 1894, the brothers built their own building. Then John Morton suffered a nervous breakdown during the silver panic of 1896, but he recovered in 6 months. After surviving the panic, the store was faced with another problem. The town newspaper had a circulation of only about 300, and John Morton didn't feel his advertising messages were getting to enough people. So in 1903, the brothers started their own newspaper, the Smithville Star, with Ed Heaton as its editor. My grandfather, Leon Morton Sr., recalled that the old 5-column press, which was used to print the paper, had to be turned by hand, which was a chore because there was no electricity. John invented a pump device that made the operation easier, which he attached to the flywheel of the press. Printing only 1 page at a time, they put out 8 pages each Thursday and soon built their circulation up to 2,500. Leon Sr.'s job was folding the pages into papers. In 1909, the Star was sold to its editor, Mr. Heaton, who also purchased the other newspaper, the Herald. The editor then combined the two into the Democrat Herald. Leon recalls that his dad was against the newspaper taking a political affiliation, and that was the reason Herald was used on the masthead. Back to the store history. In 1903, Crawford Morton sold his interest to his brother, and the name was changed to the John Morton Dry Goods Company. John bought out The Dodson Furniture and Undertaking establishment, which was next door to the north. This was about 1905 or 1906. By then, electric lights were common in farm homes. In 1910, the business was incorporated with John as president and son Leon as secretary and treasurer. In 1930, John retired and Leon became president. Leon's brother, John Jr., worked in the store for a while, but eventually left to start Morton's Mortuary in North Kansas City. An article in the DH on May 26, 1933, the 40th anniversary of the Morton store, recalls when the store opened, excuse me, in 1893, there were no telephones, electric lights, rural mail carriers, automobiles, radios, or paved roads. Country people came to town, usually on Saturday, to spend the day shopping, visiting, and to learn the news of the day. Here's a picture of the Morton brothers letterhead. Both John Morton and Crawford are listed at the top. And they also, there's a little IOU written on the back of the business card. The store was unusual in that it operated on a strict cash only basis. The name of the store had been changed from Morton Brothers to John Morton Dry Goods Company. This is the Morton family. John Morton with his family down in the right. Nevertheless, the store's success is attributed to the dependable merchandise, marking goods at the lowest possible prices, and then making liberal use of the local newspaper to invite the public to their store. In the early 1900s, the Morton store, which sold Buster Brown shoes out of St. Louis, would host Buster Brown, who would take the train to the store, and a large crowd would gather outside. Little Buster Brown would stand on a high podium and talk to the people. The store sold these shoes for school children and also had a list of school supplies for each grade that the students could buy before classes began. This is a picture of the store in 1919. The selling of school supplies continued into the 50s and 60s. And I remember that in preparation for my next grade at school, I would sit on the stools at the counter and pick out my supplies from a list. Class rings were also purchased there in the early years. If a person would purchase as much as $1 worth of merchandise, they would receive a free plate during the Christmas season. Glass serving bowls were also given to customers. Many young girls, including Lou Kindred's mother, would model the latest style dresses for the store. And there was always a Santa Claus for people who tell their stories during the Christmas season. During that decorations. Here's a picture of the store. John Morton died June 7, 1930 at the age of 62. That year, pre-sliced Wonder Bread landed on store shelves throughout the United States and became very popular. John had been in the mercantile business for over 37 years, and it was said that there was no better known merchant in this part of the state. You can see Brown shoes, the Buster Brown shoes at the top of the doorway in this slide. The Democrat Herald said in its obituary of John that there is no way of estimating the enormity of John Morton's contribution to the growth and development of Smithville. The Morton store was, in a sense, a pioneer in today's practice of free parking by large stores. John hired an Irishman by the name of Tom McCulley, whose job it was to tie the horses to a hitching rack across the street from the store. Morton paid $10 a year rent for the hitching rack, and it helped attract business with Tommy's services of tying the horses, carrying the eggs in to the store to be sold, carrying groceries out to the buggies, and helping the ladies to again be on their way with most of the shopping completed in one transaction at the Morton store. What lady could resist that convenience? For 37 years, John was an outstanding merchant whose liberal use of newspaper advertising made his name a household word in 3 counties. Unlike today, advertising was an experiment, but Mr. Morton knew it was pay. The obituary in the was treated about as friendly and obliging, and his friends in the surrounding counties were numbered by hundreds. He was interested in public affairs. He served on the school board and was treasurer of it up until his death, painstakingly and carefully using public funds. During his lifetime, Mr. Morton undoubtedly accomplished a great deal of good. Okay. Oops. How did that happen?
Hey, Molly, your volume is going in and out. I don't know if you're speaking directly into your microphone.
Oh,
Yeah.
I haven't moved much, but I'll move. Am I okay now?
Yes, that's good.
Okay. This is my grandfather. This is Leon Morton Sr. Leon Morton attended the State Teachers College in Kirksville and a retail training school operated by J.C. Penney before joining the store full-time. He married Mildred Farmer, also from Smithville, daughter of Coleman and Lucy G. Skaggs Farmer, on February 18, 1919. They had 2 children, Martha Lou and Leon Makes Jr., who is my father. After John's death, this is a picture of the store in 1937. After John's death in 1930, Leon carried on the corporation until 1937, when it was dissolved as the federal taxes on corporations had become almost unbearable. Leon Sr., who started with the store handing out circulars at the front door when he was knee-high, and later graduated to candy salesman, recalls that produce began to appear on the shelves of the stores in the early 1900s. Bananas, lemons, and oranges were the only items, with cabbage and potatoes being added later. They also bought country cured meat from local farmers and sold it in the store. Here's a picture of the back page of the Democrat Herald and the Morton's ads, of which I fondly remember. Often Leon Sr. could be seen at his desk looking out of the office while setting the type for the full back page ad for the upcoming week's publication of the Democrat Herald newspaper. Morton's opened the first beauty parlor in the Smithville area, and they sold the first appliances. The floods of 1947 and 1950 came within inches of flooding their buildings. Here's a picture of the store during the floodwaters creeping up on the to the sidewalk for the 1947 flood. And then here's several other pictures. This is a picture of the Morton house on Meadow Street, and my grandmother Mildred walking, probably came from the store and was walking home. About this time, Leon Sr. and Mildred bought a land on the hill north of Smithville and built a home out of the flood area. Later, Leon Jr., my dad and mother, Ruth, would build a house near the old football field on the corner of Brassfield and Highland out of the floodplain. This is my dad in his military uniform. Leon Jr. worked at the drugstore packing ice cream during high school, where he played on the basketball team. He joined the Army Air Corps in 1943 and was sent to Europe via the Queen Elizabeth ocean liner. He was a storekeeper and played on the American basketball team at night. After returning from England and Germany, Leon Jr. attended William Jewell College. Here's the front porch. Dad's back there, second from the left, or second from the back, kind of in the middle, left middle. During the week, he lived at the Phi Gamma Delta house, where he was study hall monitor and made many lifelong friends. The house only had one parking space, but that didn't matter. Leon Jr. had the only car. He worked at the store on Saturdays, and after his graduation of May 1949, worked there full time. Ruth Adams, whom he met at William Jewell College, was from Chicago. They had two daughters, Mollie. They married on August 13, 1949, and settled in Smithville. They had two daughters, Mollie and Martha. Leon Jr. was running the feed store at the end of the block when I was born, with a barbershop between it and the store. Morton's department store at the time was two large rooms, the southern one with dry goods in the front and groceries in the back. The northern room had hardware, appliances, tools, etc. in it. Another first was scored by the Morton store when WDAF TV started in Kansas City. The only picture printed in the KC Star the next morning was a picture made in Morton's store on one of the first TV sets in the area, showing Randall Jesse, who was of the Star, on the screen. My mother, Ruth Morton, was prominent in the picture. The store went from a counter with shelves of goods behind it that a clerk, I remember Tom Cockrell doing this, would hand you when you were asked, to a modern grocery store set up with rows of shelves and carts, a checkout stand, and even a bagger on weekends. Ham sandwiches for 10 cents each were sold to promote Wonder Bread periodically. This was in about the early 60s. There's a Pat store stationery, of which I still have one. This was used to take orders and write up the sales. This is something I specifically remember Tom Cockrell using. Here's a picture of a 15-inch snowfall in 1958. Here's downtown and the store with cars in front of it. In June 1964, there was a flood in downtown Smithville, which did light damage to the stores in town. The next year, on July 19, 1965, there were flood warnings, and my mother, sister, and I went to the store to move merchandise up to 4 feet high in case we needed to leave it there for a few weeks until the flood danger passed. Well, the danger didn't pass, and by late that evening, we were trapped in the store with water above our knees and rapidly rising. The current had changed somewhat and was coming through the front door of the store and out the back. Eventually, we made our way to the old hospital building where there were now some mission people living, and we spent the night in the few rooms on the 3rd floor. The next morning, we went out on the 2nd floor roof and were rescued by a boat with no less than a 75 horsepower motor. We were taken to the Littrell's house above the high school, where we were fed and took a nap. Dad was rescued later, but was let out somewhere else. He did get a helicopter ride to see the damage and went to the Spelman Hospital to give blood, since he was a universal donor. We all went up there soon after to get our first of 3 typhoid shots. Leon Sr. had parked his little red Corvair, seen down on the left, bottom left, thinking it was a safe place to avoid any flooding. The car was covered with water, and when it dried out, Leon drove it for the rest of his life. Now this, I think the car had been moved before, moved because it had dried out some by then. In September, the Democrat Herald published a small notice under echoes of the flood as follows. As time goes by, it becomes more remarkable that many lives were not lost. Every day we hear of narrow escapes. Mr. and Mrs. Leon Morton and daughters Mollie and Martha, Mr. and Mrs. Bob Lake, Miss Maureen Farmer, and Leon Morton Sr. remained in the Morton store almost too long, but when the water was waist deep, they were able to reach the 3rd floor of the Gospel Mission building, where employees of the mission were marooned all night. Someone thought of Miss Betty Thatcher, who lives between the mission and the drugstore. Leon Morton Jr. went for her and was barely able to pull her through the current to the mission. After being removed from the mission, Betty was taken to the home of Miss Hugh Fan and Lois, where she remained for 2 weeks while her home was being rehabilitated. Had Bob Lake not been there, it would have been very difficult to get us all out before the water dragged us down, because he and Leon Jr. were the only ones able to stand up in the current. The Morton house on Meadow Street survived, but next door, Lula Cobb, Leon Sr.'s sister's house, only was spared from being hit by the Campbell house, which was dislodged from its foundation because instead the Campbell house slammed into a huge mulberry bush and tree which blocked its way. A few days later, Missouri Senator Stuart Symington reported to the United States Senate on the flood in response to Leon's report to him on the devastation. This is preserved in the congressional record. Senator Symington secured $50,000 that fall for the rebuilding of the street, sewer system, and other infrastructure in town. We, my sister Martha, a great aunt Zoe, Aunt Rosalia, Granddad Morton, and my mother Ruth spent the rest of the summer in the store cleaning what merchandise survived. Granddad sold what he could. He also had apartments on Meadow Street that needed cleaning and rehabilitation. Leon Jr. got a job in Excelsior Springs, 28 miles away, managing a laundry, a commercial laundry. At the time of its closing, because of the disastrous flood, Morton's department store was then one of the oldest established businesses in Clay County. Previous floods had occurred in 1885, 1917, 1929, 1947, 1964, and then the one that put the store out of business on July 19, 1965. More than 400 people had worked there, and the store occupied about 10,000 square feet of floor space, including warehouses. This is a gathering to celebrate a picture of the gathering to celebrate the donation of funds to build the Linton Center at the dam. I guess the Smithville Clinic gave enough to push it over the top. For the town to continue to exist and grow, something had to be done to meet the need for flood protection, a need some citizens had recognized for years. Leon, Jim Justice, and other believers that flood protection was a must if Smithville was to continue as a viable community, decided that something had to be done. Using the existing Platte River Flood Control Association of Northwest Missouri as a starting point and recognizing that a solution would involve large amounts of money, efforts were made by the board and its treasurer, Leon Morton, to gain the support of appropriate federal, state, and local authorities. The road was long and beset by many problems, mostly political. The personal trips and appearances by board members, usually at their own expense and often to Washington, D.C., gradually became effective, then successful. Now Smithville has its beautiful dam and lake for all to enjoy. Most important is the lack of perennial threat of flooding. Leon Sr. is able to witness the dedication of the dam, lake, and park prior to his death. He and those people who work so hard on the impossible task should feel justly proud. Here's a picture of the Smithville Kiwanis Club. Leon's life spanned the steam age and watched the progress into nuclear power, a span that watched the dawn of the automobile and airplane and electrified farm home, a time span which saw advances in medicine that physicians like his grandfather, a Civil War doctor, could not even dare imagine. He was devoted to the Protestant work ethic, carrying on and improving the family business while giving all consideration to the needs of his community in non-business ways. Leon was a member of the First Christian Church, the Oddfellows Lodge, the Scottish Rite Bodies, the Arawat Shrine from 1915 on, as well as a member of and past member of Smithville's Masonic Lodge, where he was its treasurer for 30 years. He was a charter member of the Smithville Kiwanis Club and chairman and commissioner of the Pioneer District of the Boy Scouts of America and former chairman of the Smithville Housing Authority. Following his son's interest in creating an effective, active fire protection system for the growing town, Leon was an organizer, former treasurer, and board member of the Smithville Community Firefighters Association. He was an organizer of Citizens Bank and Trust Company, buying the original stock to help capitalize it, and an organizer of Smithville Community Hospital. He sold the land to the Hospital Association for what he owed on it. Leon Jr., Sid Williams, Cliff Williams, and John Lohman hauled the blocks it was built with. The hospital, with its 12 rooms, was furnished by the Morton store at cost. Lots of nights were spent putting the beds together and furnishings in place. In the Democrat Herald, September 22nd, 1983. Not long after coming to this newspaper, an elderly man wearing a hat and holding a cane came into the Democrat Herald office to welcome me to Smithville. This man, it was soon found out, embodied much of the 20th century history of this community. We at the newspaper office thought of Leon as the grand old man of Smithville. He easily made us feel at home, was friendly without any motive for personal gain, and was perhaps the richest store of knowledge about Smithville of any inhabitant. We always wanted to interview Leon and put more of his observations and recollections in the newspaper. Time flies and we did not get around to it, so now we must rely on memories and written records. Leon impressed us with his knowledge about the history of the Democrat Herald and once even guessed our present circulation to its nearest 100. At the right time, he would come in the office to make sure his and members of his family living away had their subscriptions paid up. Smithville lost one of its grandest citizens. The opportunity we had to learn more from him is forever gone, but the community itself and its residents have had their life touched by Leon Morton, and the town today stands as a monument to Leon Morton. After Leon's death, the city of Smithville aldermen approved a resolution noting his passing and honoring his memory. It set forth many of his contributions to the city of Smithville and quote, the board desires to express to the Morton family the high esteem in which Leon was held by all members of the board and their profound sorrow at his passing. Howard Taylor was mayor at that time. Now I'm going to show you some slides of store memorabilia. My parents loved antiques, and I and many members of my family have these items that were saved from the early years of the store. This is a slide of an oak table. Oak wasn't considered a good wood later on, like the 50s and 60s, according to my dad. That's what he told me. And they sold many of these tables for $2. They had a warehouse full of them at the time of the flood. This is a fire extinguisher that hung in the store. My dad had them made into lamps. And in some of those earlier pictures, you could have seen that those fire extinguishers hanging there. This is a glass pickle jar. I don't keep pickles in it. That sat next to the brass cash register that was on one of the glass cabinets in the middle of the store as you would check out. The brass lamp that hung in the store, and those are prominent in some of the early pictures as well. And the spool cabinet, I remember being in the sewing area of the store, and it had thread and other sewing notions. This stool is one of several that were in front of this display cabinet left of the store entrance, where you could pick out school supplies and stockings. I think they had stockings in that area as well, from my memory. This is a rendering of Leon Jr.'s pickup truck in front of the store. Finally, thanks to my mother, Ruth, grandfather Leon Sr. for keeping many newspaper clippings, cousins Steve Lohman and Linda McComas for their memories, the Democrat Herald for their long years of coverage of my family, Colonel and Lou Kindred for their writings and memorabilia, and for all the other documents that I used to put together this program. Thank you to Kathleen Bird for asking me to do this. It was a great opportunity.